Welcome in, coming to you live from the capital city of the great state of Texas, overlooking downtown Austin and the University of Texas. Welcome to the weekly podcast that understands that the pride and tradition of the Texas football program and Texas athletics will never be entrusted to the timid or the weak. It's episode 37 of the Eyes on Texas multicast. EOT are a product of the Republic of Football and Dave Campbell's Texas Football Podcast Network, powered by our presenting partner at Grande Equipment and our four other founding partners who've been with us all year long as we roll into 2024. I'm Aaron Hogan, morning show host at The Horn here in Austin. He is the senior writer at Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine. Mike Craven, our digital editor, is Nolan Hogan. He'll help us with our halftime coming up and digital elements throughout the course of the broadcast tonight and the 37th episode as we roll this thing out. A lot to do. Let's start with this. Mike Craven, how are you, my friend?
Doing pretty good. The flu is in the rearview mirror. Still dealing a little bit with the cough. But we're overcoming and into 2024 with a bang here.
Nolan, you're sporting the Houston Texans hat, which, for a lot of his life, Mike, I raised him a Texans fan, and that's child abuse on a lot of levels, as that goes, but here we are into the second round of the playoffs. Fun to watch. So, Nolan, you're full bore. You went to a Texans game this year, went down to NRG Stadium with a group of buddies, and they're a fun team to follow. More fun right now than the Cowboys, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I mean, even before the season, when we drafted CJ Stroud, it was good to have some kind of hope that we might have something going here. And then now we're going to the divisional to play Baltimore and hopefully come out of there with a win.
He's incredible.
We'll see. They're a
heavy
underdog.
Unreal.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into the Longhorns, but bears mentioning when Nolan will have the updates on the Longhorns that are still playing in the NFL playoffs, the 8 teams that do remain. And we'll run that down coming up at halftime. But, Mike, you've seen this C.J. Stroud kid. I mean, 23 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions on the year. Actually, 26 touchdowns because he had 3 against the Browns. He's only started 16 games in his career because he missed 2 regular season games this year with a concussion. Only 5 interceptions, and consider 3 of those came in one game. So he has 13 starts this year as a rookie where he hasn't thrown an interception. Just amazing the way he takes care of the football. What have you seen? You've watched a lot of football in your life, Mike. This kid is something special.
Yeah, I mean, he's like top 5 in the league potential quarterback. He can be up there with the Lamar Jacksons and the Patrick Mahomes and the Joe Burrows. Like he's that talented. And I haven't had too big of an opinion on Ryan Day and what he's done at Ohio State. I mean, going 11-1 and losing to the national champion isn't a bad year. Last year, they were a missed field goal away from beating Georgia and playing for a national championship and probably beating TCU. But he gets crushed by the Ohio State fans. And after watching C.J. Stroud play for the Texans for a year, you're like, I kind of get it, right? Like, how did he not win a couple national championships with that guy at quarterback? And so, just an uber talented guy. And when you have a quarterback like that, it's hope, right? It's like, no, it's hope. And they're going to have that for 10 to 12 years. They're going to enter every single year in playoff contention. That's a sweet spot to be as a fan.
It is. Yeah, and with a rookie quarterback who doesn't, can't even get a big contract for 3 or 4 more years, and young coach like D'Amico Ryans, who's energetic and brings a lot of energy, and third most cap space going into the offseason too. So a lot of hype, even though they don't beat Baltimore as a heavy underdog on Saturday, so they're fun to watch. We won't even dive into the Cowboys right now based on what we saw last weekend, and that was not fun to see if you're a Cowboys fan, but it's kind of par for the course of where they are right now, but laid an egg in a big spot. We'll get some NFL coming up at halftime. Obviously, our multicast, and we call it a multicast because you can find it in a lot of places on YouTube and Spotify. If you just want to listen to it, you can watch it on iTunes and Spotify. If you want to watch it, you can certainly watch it on YouTube on the Dave Campbell's Texas Football YouTube channel. We'll also upload it to the Horn in Austin, hornfm.com's YouTube channel. Find it there as well. And then follow us all over our social media platforms, which Nolan will remind us of coming up as where you can find us on socials. Of course, Instagram and X, Facebook, and all the places you find the Eyes on Texas multicast. Coming up as we run it down, it's 4 quarters and a halftime every week. Coming up in our second quarter, we'll talk Texas roster overhaul, specifically those Longhorns who have declared for the NFL draft and are planning to head to the NFL starting next season. April's draft is coming off of playoff weekends and into the Super Bowl. Then it'll be draft season. So we'll certainly look at the Longhorns, and there are plenty of them. And a pretty interesting take from Dane Brugler of theathletic.com this week that as many as 6 Longhorns could be drafted in the first 60 picks of the draft, first 2 rounds. We'll talk about that coming up in our second quarter. Also, the Longhorns that are returning and not going to the NFL draft. There are 4 critical ones, which we will talk about. At halftime, as we mentioned, Nolan will get us into the Longhorns still in the playoffs. Third quarter, we'll have a serious discussion about Texas basketball, as we are the Eyes on Texas multicast. We talked a lot of football, but Longhorn basketball is hitting the gauntlet of their Big 12 schedule. Are they even an NCAA tournament team at this point? Got to talk about it with Rodney Terry in his first full season. They're kind of scuffling into the Big 12 right now, and it is a rough run in the Big 12 conference right now. As many good teams there are. Plus, our fourth quarter, always wrap it up with the 4 big questions outside the state of Texas and around college football. There's certainly plenty of those. Before we start and dive into the Longhorns, let's thank our presenting partner at Grande Equipment, our great friend Wes Murray and his team. They understand when you have a major project, small, large, no matter the scope of that project, and you need heavy equipment, you need to partner with someone who's going to be with you, shoulder to shoulder, aligned with you, and get to the finish line of that project on time, on budget, and hassle-free. That's how Grande has operated for 31 years. As Wes always tells me to tell you folks, they're not in the equipment business. They're in the relationship business. They understand what your task is. You need the right piece of equipment for your project. They get you what you want, as much of it as you need. They get you quickly without hassles and the uncertainty of whether it's job site ready or not. And they are an independent equipment dealer, meaning they deal with major manufacturers, not locked into one. Caterpillar, John Deere, Komatsu, Volvo, and more. Heavy equipment, sales, and rentals. Find them at grandeequipment.com. And keep in mind, Grandale now has a new renewable energy sector that's growing like crazy. Check them out, all their solar projects all over the country. Grande is your international independent dealer. Find them at grandeequipment.com, locally based right here in Central Texas. Grande doesn't overpromise. They over-deliver. All right, let's kick off with our first quarter. It'll be brought to you and closed on time by our buddy Carlos Carrion, the Texas mortgage guy, one of our 4 founding partners. We'll talk about Carlos coming up. But let's start with Texas football, Mike. And Nolan, the news of the week includes Steve Sarkisian. Obviously when Nick Saban stepped aside last week, what a whirlwind week it was. Within a 20-hour period, Nick Saban retires. Bill Belichick out in New England, Pete Carroll out in Seattle. I'm 51 years old. I've said in my adult life, Mike, those are the 3 best coaches in football that I've covered and seen. I mean, we know what Bill Belichick's all about. We know what Nick Saban did at Alabama. You think about Pete Carroll, he was a missed 4th down against Texas in 2005 and Marshawn Lynch, don't give it to beast mode from winning 3 straight national championships and 2 straight Super Bowls in the NFL. I know that's not what he did, but still 3 great coaches being either pushed out, set aside, or resigning in a 20-hour period. That was pretty amazing last week.
Yeah, no doubt. A big seismic shift in college football. It'll be interesting to see what that Alabama job is, right? For the first 18 years of my life, Alabama was just an SEC school, like a lot of SEC schools, right? I didn't see the Alabama job as better than any other job in the right. It wasn't better in Ohio State or Michigan but with Nick Saban, it made it the best job in football, right? It made Alabama the class of college football and kind of the capital of college football for a long time. Does that remain true? Do they kind of fall back into the pack like they were, back in the Franchione days, right? Back in the Mike Price day? Like what happens with Alabama moving forward, and where are they in the pecking order? It kind of changes. Not only SEC, but just college football at large.
No question. Yeah. And for people like Nolan, who's only known Alabama being great, they went through there from Gene Stallings to Nick Saban. They bumped around with guys like Mike Shula and Mike Price. They had their, vagabond days.
Fran left for A&M.
Yeah, Dennis Franchione. Left, and that was a jolt to Alabama, the home of Bear Bryant. You don't leave Alabama for Texas A&M, but Dennis Franchione did it after he left TCU to take that job. And yes, and obviously Nick Saban has taken it back to being the premier job in all of college football. And how do you keep it there? I was interested when Kalen DeBoer stepped in front of those players, Mike, for the first time, those Alabama players, and I'm just thinking, I don't envy him. That's a really, really hard job. Those players have been coached, recruited, and brought in by the best that's ever done it. And now you have to step in front of them and be impressive. I mean, you have to be impressive to those young guys. That's a real challenge, and we'll talk about it coming up. But they've got a bunch of guys into the transfer portal. The Longhorns have already landed a couple of Alabama players through that portal. But obviously, that move led to Steve Sarkisian being an immediate candidate last week. That was obviously a fear of all Longhorn fans that Sark may consider that, but. Right now, Alabama is not as good a job as Texas. I mean, Texas is a better job. The resources for NIL, everything we've talked about, they're now moving into the SEC. And pretty quickly, CDC, Chris Del Conte moved with Jay Hartzell, the president, to get a new deal on the table. And by Friday of last week, or on Saturday, it was official, but I was told it was done Thursday night into Friday. If you remember, Sark had a tweet or an X post about 10:50 on Thursday night about it's great to be a Longhorn. His wife followed it up, L'Oreal, which really indicated, and I was told that was them agreeing in principle to a new contract, had to be sent to the Board of Regents and rubber stamped. But new 4-year extension, Mike. He's halfway through his original 6-year deal where he was making, $5.5 million. Obviously, this will come with a significant pay bump. But it extends the contract from where it is currently and adds 4 years on the backside. So it's now a contract that runs through 2030 for Steve Sarkisian. I would believe well-deserved, but your thoughts on the new deal for Sark?
I don't understand why athletic directors are so fast to extend coaches, like just in general. And that's not to say Sark isn't going to coach at Texas for the next 20 years and win national championships. I have no idea. But if we agree that Texas is the better job at Alabama, at least when you're following Nick Saban, and it didn't seem like anybody in his tree, like Dan Lanning or Kirby Smart or Sark, wanted to step into that chair. If you're Texas, why not just give him a raise, keep the contract the way it is, and say if you go and you win in the SEC next year and we make the college football playoff, we'll make you a top 5 paid coach in the country. But we're going to have to see you do it in the conference that you're about to be in every single year. It's not a unreasonable ask to see it done twice. You only have to go down to College Station to kind of see why you don't give a guy an early extension. Same thing with Arkansas after 1 year. We could go through. Dave Aranda at Baylor is at Baylor still to this day because he has a buyout so high because of the extension after 2021. I'm not saying Sark isn't going to live out that extension and make it all worth it. And maybe we look back in 4 years and this was a deal. But just in general, I don't understand why college athletics or college athletic directors are so quick to give raises and give extensions and not let coaches run out some of their contract. And then we look back and we wonder why the buyouts are so big and why so much dead money exists in college football. It's because at the first sign of success, you just dump all this money in the front yard in fear of losing your guy. And you're probably not going to lose your guy. I don't think Sarkisian was going to walk out the door. And if he really wanted the Alabama job, they would have come up with the money to get it if that's who they were hiring. And so I don't know. It just seems like an unnecessary move for me. I would have given him $1 million bump and then waited until next year and then give him the extension.
That's a very pragmatic, practical Mike Craven. But I mean, in this world of college athletics, I mean, it's not, I don't think that's feasible. The agents push the game and, Sark, well, let's just be fair. Sark for his first 3 years was on a prove it deal, right? He was making less at Texas than Tom Herman was making before him. So, he earned that and he earned a raise. I don't disagree with you that adding 4 more years, but we'll get, freedom of information. We'll get that contract. I don't know if it's an ironclad guaranteed contract like we've seen. We'll see. And what the buyout looks like. Obviously, Jimbo Fisher is the latest precedent of that. But look at Washington. Washington lost their coach because they didn't have much of a buyout at all. I mean, he could have gone anywhere. And the reports out of Husky land was they were trying to get Kalen DeBoer to sit down before the national championship and agree to a new deal. He wouldn't do it. I mean, he wouldn't put an ink to paper. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. But you're right. For Sark, he's sitting on the best job in the country. He's not walking out of this job. I do remember back when Mack Brown had hit Texas to the top and in the 2000s, and DeLoss Dodds was the AD, and he told me many times, we're just going to bump him up every year, keep him where he needs to be, because to hire the next coach, that's where we're going to start. If Mack were to somehow leave and go somewhere, we'd have to start at that number to bring in the next coach. So we just feel like keeping him there. But I agree with you at a lot of levels on the extended years. You can give him a raise, let him finish out the first 6 years with 3 more to go and kind of add a significant bump. But that is obviously where Texas agreed, and agents, Jimmy Sexton, who happens to be the agent for Sark, the agent for Kalen DeBoer, the agent for Nick Saban. He's the grand wizard back there making all these things happen in college football. That guy did well last week, safe to say. But Sark staying, new contract, extension, and we'll see. I think he's doing a good job. But as you say, it can turn pretty quickly too, and all of a sudden you're stuck with these contracts. I do think for our audience here on Eyes on Texas, I think if Sark were to leave, it wouldn't be for another college job, Mike. The NFL would be the next thing for Sark, because there's not a better job in college football than what he's got here, the way he's got it rolling, this coaching staff. But, he does have NFL ties. They keep winning at this level and keep, roster building and culture building, and he gets into the SEC and continues this. the NFL will come calling at some point. That would be one thing I would look for, but you can't really prevent that if you're a college administrator.
Yeah, no doubt. I guess that's where I stand with it is he's not walking out that door for a different college job. Like where would he
Yeah.
go? Like even if you think Alabama is a slightly better job, it's not enough better to start over and try to follow Nick Saban, right? If you say Ohio State is a slightly better job, it's not enough of a better job to go to a place that you don't have any ties to and try to win that, right? And so like where is he going? Where and so to me, again, give him the raise. Make him one of the highest paid coaches in the country. You're the University of Texas. You have the money. He's proven he's a safe bet, and his kind of demons are behind him, and all the things you worried about early, I think you feel pretty good about.
Yeah.
I just think college football is littered with dudes who did it one time and got these huge extensions, and then colleges had 5 years of dead money on the back end. Just make a guy do it twice. He still had 3 years left on his contract, right? It's not like it was the next year it was running out. See how he does next year when he wins 10 games like we all think he will and goes to the playoff. Then you make him one of the top 5 highest paid coaches in the country. I just, in general, not even just at Texas, I just am a do it twice before I give you a big time extension, I guess, principled man.
Don't agree with that, or don't disagree with that at all. I just think that that's what agents push for these days, and administrators are often too reticent to do it and just give it, and but not risk the big picture. And you're right, Jimbo Fisher, the latest example. And yeah, by the way, Ross Bjork is off to Ohio State now. You kind of wondered about that, but that's not going to start till July. But yeah, he did not give Jimbo Fisher, hire Jimbo Fisher, but he did give him that extension and that mega bonus that ended up costing the Aggies a lot of money. And then, of course, he maybe screwed up the Mark Stoops hire with Mike Elko when now he's going to Ohio State. So you wonder if that was kind of mutual for Elko and Texas A&M. What your thoughts on that? Was that mutual, or is that Elko just jumping at the next good thing? Because it felt like to me when he screwed up the Mark Stoops hiring that maybe he was kind of persona non grata in College Station with a lot of the big money and a lot of the folks there, that he kind of screwed up the process and kind of embarrassed the school.
Yeah, I think this is one of those moments where the nobody's upset, neither X, right? Neither part of this or neither party to this is upset to be leaving. I think Bjork would like a fresh start. I don't think the A&M fan base and brass is that upset that he's leaving. I think for A&M, the bigger deal here is the inconsistency behind the scenes. Like they're about to hire their 5th athletic director since 2012. They're on their 3rd university president since 2020. They on their 3rd head coach since 2017. There just hadn't been a lot of continuity, a lot of consistency behind the scenes, and that alignment really matters at the top level of college football. Texas fans know that. I mean, it's not a coincidence that DeLoss Dodds goes away and all of a sudden football, basketball, and baseball aren't very good for a long time until they kind of get their house in order behind the scenes, and now everything's kind of rolling in a better direction again. I think A&M has just had so much turnover; they don't have much identity within their athletic department. And until they figure that out, they're gonna underachieve like they have with their resources the last 11 years.
All right, so that's all happening, and Steve Sarkisian locked up for the next 8, 6, 7 years through 2030, or actually 6 years for Texas. Had 3 years left and through 2030, so 7 years for the Longhorns. All right, also in our first quarter here, brought to you by Carlos Carrion, the Texas Mortgage Guy. Let's talk and get you updated. The Longhorns now have 6, as we record this on a Wednesday night. Longhorns have 6 total transfer portal commitments for their new roster in 2024. The latest being former Oregon State wide receiver Silas Bolden. He committed to Texas just this week. He's a mighty mite, 5'8", maybe 160 pounds after a big meal. He's fresh off a breakout season in Corvallis, caught 54 passes, over 700 yards, 5 touchdowns. 3rd wide receiver added through the portal by the Longhorns since the portal opened in December. He joins Isaiah Bond, who comes in from Alabama, who's a big-time get. Got him over the weekend. He was the first player to jump in the portal after Nick Saban stepped aside last week. He was the leading receiver at Alabama. He is a track star out of Buford, Georgia. Played 2 years in Tuscaloosa, but ran the 100 and 200 in high school, and just flat out fast. He'll kind of remind you of Xavier Worthy. Obviously, Texas saw him in the game there in September in Tuscaloosa. Just elite speed. That goes with the kid from Oregon State, Silas Bolden. And then Houston transfer Matthew Golden also came in pretty early on too. So Golden and Bolden both project as return experts too. So it helps your special teams. Mike, the receiving corps for Quinn Ewers in 2024, kind of like a law firm, right? The law firm of Cook, Bolden, Put Cook, Golden, Bolden, Wingo, and Bond. How about that? Cook, Golden, Bolden, Wingo, and Bond. What are you going with? What are your thoughts on these three receiver additions for the Longhorns?
Yeah, the addition of Isaiah Bond will be something we look back on in November as maybe the biggest addition, the biggest moment of the offseason for Texas. Because if the other three are added, or if like Matthew Golden and Bolden are added to that wide receiver group, you got Jonte Cook coming out, you're still wondering who that number one guy is, right? Who's going to be the number one outside guy that can demand double teams, be the dude you go to on 3rd and 4, you need a big play. Well, now you have that. Now Isaiah Bond is your number one. Jonte Cook can work into becoming a number 2. Matthew Golden can be a complementary piece where he, is his most comfortable at. And then you add a slot receiver demon in Bolden that can gobble up catches and it can be a safety blanket and kind of make up for some of the JT Sanders, absence, right? Like if you don't have your tight end and you're not going to get 60 catches from your tight end, well, if you get 70 from your slot receiver and 40 from your tight end, well, that evens out the Jordan Whittington, JT Sanders miss there in the middle of the field as your safety blanket for Quinn Ewers. So I think the Isaiah Bond addition is huge. Not only are you taking from Alabama, a direct competitor in the SEC, which makes them a little bit worse, makes you a little bit better. I think it opens up Matthew Golden, Jonte Cook, Ryan Wingo, like they get to be secondary pieces in this puzzle, not just the number one dude. And I think that's going to unlock them in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been if a Bond isn't in the equation.
I think you're right about that. He's the immediate replacement for X-Man, X-Worthy as the go-to guy, and he wants to develop. I mean, those guys are pretty clear. What A.D. Mitchell did last year coming in from Georgia where he was winning, but draft stock wasn't where he wanted. He comes in and all of a sudden he's projected as a top first round pick, top 40 pick in the NFL draft. Isaiah Bond said the same thing. It was an interesting quote from Isaiah when Nick Saban jumped in the portal. This is like Christmas for Texas that Nick Saban stepped aside because they may add 2 or 3 players from that Alabama team because of the familiarity with the staffs. But he said, look, this is my corporation and my corporation is looking to improve its draft stock. And I want to, you got a 3rd-year quarterback in Quinn. You got a veteran offensive line. And to your point, last year the passing game was good. And it felt like the receivers had to elevate Quinn Ewers' play. I think this year Quinn Ewers is going to have to elevate the receivers' play. I think Quinn Ewers is going to have to be the leader and help elevate this core. But last year you had you had a specific type of receiver. You had X-Man with speed. A.D. Mitchell was the route runner with the great radius and high ball and just a go-to guy in clutch moments. Jay Witt was kind of the running back out there, the physical presence, blocking and just making big plays. Well, now it's getting closer to what Sark had at Alabama, Mike, where it's just 4 dudes that can go, 4 speed demons that are just flat out fast. And there aren't many secondaries, even in the SEC, that have that many fast guys. They deploy these guys all at once. You're right about the loss of JT Sanders at tight end because in the previous year, JT was kind of that mismatch nightmare because when you had the other guys, okay, we got a matchup here, got to get our speed guys here, got to probably roll some coverage to X-Man. You got to make sure we got AD covered with a good corner. And then JT was the problem, right? What do we do with him? We can't put him on a linebacker safety. I think a more experienced Quinn may have even used JT Sanders more than he did, kind of like Patrick Mahomes does Travis Kelce in Kansas City. But this year, when you have the speed like they're adding with the big humans up front, that's a problem. I mean, these guys can really run. Silas Bolden, if you watch his film at Oregon State, that's the other thing, Mike. If you hadn't added these portal guys, you were coming back with a lot of guys who haven't done much. I mean, 85% of your receptions are gone. You're kind of hoping that these guys develop. Now you don't have to do that. These guys can all compete together, but Isaiah Bond's done it for 2 years at Alabama and been productive. Matthew Golden's done it for 2 years at Houston and done it. And Silas Bolden's done it for several years at Corvallis. And, those guys, you can watch the film. They're explosive players. So, this pushes Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, Ryan Wingo. Everybody's got to step up. I do agree with you that Isaiah Bond is the biggest. On the defensive side, since we've talked last, the Longhorns also added this week a former Duncanville Panther, also from Alabama, linebacker named Kendrick Blackshear. He commits to Texas. He was a critical piece of Alabama's special teams units the last couple of years. He never really cracked the rotation at linebacker because they're so talented at linebacker at Alabama. He did play some middle linebacker, but he joins Trey Moore, Andrew Makuba as the defensive transfer portal additions. Just like you mentioned Isaiah Bond, Mike, I think Andrew Makuba might be the biggest. I mean, Trey Moore brings immediate pass rush, which they need. But Blackshear is kind of a rotational player that's a good athlete. I want your thoughts on him because I'm sure you saw him when he was at Duncanville. But for me, Makuba is kind of the could be like the AD Mitchell or Isaiah Bond to the defense. With he and Jahdae Barron both being back, you can really have some veteran leadership in that back end as you're trying to cross-train young corners and really kind of change the talent level of your secondary.
Yeah, Makuba can play so many different spots, and he's played such high level of football. You know what you're getting there with him, right? Like as long as he's healthy, he's going to start somewhere on your defense and kind of stabilize a lot going back there. With Blackshear, like he was awesome at Duncanville, like a really good player for one of the better teams in the state, obviously. But he kind of always felt like a guy who maybe just wasn't quite big enough to play defensive line, maybe not fast enough to play linebacker the way a linebacker needs to be played nowadays. Like he strikes me as like kind of like Steve Edmond, to kind of throw back a name there. Where like maybe 20 years ago you put him in the middle of the football field and he would have crushed a team that was running the veer, but just nobody's running the veer anymore, right? So you don't really need that kind of just run stopper, just guy in the middle. But he'll be a really good rotational piece. He'll give you depth. He'll be really good on special teams. He's an experienced guy. Another dude in that defensive room that you don't have to teach how to be a college football player. I think that's where Texas is getting towards, where they don't have many guys in the locker room anymore that you have to like really teach what this thing is about. They're even adding dudes from the portal, from programs that already know how a big time college football program is ran.
Well, at Alabama, you've been coached well, right? You're being coached really well.
Clemson.
And Clemson too with Makuba, Trey Moore down at UTSA and the pass rush. So looking forward to watching those guys. Yeah, Blackshear probably a replacement for Jet Bush, who announced he's going to the NFL. Just a guy who can come in and be a rotational player. Because they're going to be very young at linebacker next year too. We know that with Jalen Ford moving on. And, David Benda will be back. And we'll talk about that coming up in our second quarter. A couple more things in our first quarter here, and then we'll wrap it up. But those are your 6 portal additions. Longhorns are very interested in a couple of more too. 2 of whom they'll oppose one another in the national championship game. University of Washington cornerback Jabbar Muhammad is visiting Texas this week, Mike. This is a guy you saw him wearing number 1 at Washington. He's a very aggressive corner. His cousin is Manny Muhammad, the Longhorn. He went to DeSoto High School, Jabbar, and then ended up going to Oklahoma State for a couple of years, then off to Washington. Apparently, he is interested in maybe joining his cousin here at Texas. Got a lot of friends in that locker room. He's also going to visit Alabama, where Kalen DeBoer is now. But that's you tell me you're going to have Jabbar Muhammad, Manny Muhammad, and Terrence Brooks as your corners next year with the safeties, Derek Williams, Andrew Makuba, Jahdae Barron. A weakness last year was the secondary. It could become a strength really quickly for Texas.
Yeah, I mean, anytime, secondary is one of those sneaky tough positions to add through the portal. Like, I think we look at skill position guys like on the offensive side, like wide receiver is the easiest place to add talent in the portal. Offensive line is probably the toughest. But corner is a tough one as well, just because of how valuable that position is, right? It's like left tackle on the offense, where it really is kind of the number 1 drafted position in the NFL now, outside of edge on the defensive side of the ball. So if you can go and add a dude who played in a national championship game, who's a starter, who is one of the reasons that you kind of locked down the Texas offense as Washington's defense for about 3 quarters there. I think that would be an excellent pickup and somebody you can slide in maybe to a starting role as soon as he walks on campus.
Do you remember him at DeSoto, Mike? Or does that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he was a good player, right?
Yeah, he's a good player. He was one of those players that if he was somewhere else, probably is more highly regarded. But when you're at a place like DeSoto, if you're not Byron Murphy or Shamar Stewart, like you're Shamar Turner, you're going to just slip through he's like, yeah, he's really good, but he's the 4th best player on this defense. Right. And like, it's just, sometimes it can be hard from a recruiting standpoint to be like, yeah, 4 of the best 10 players are out in DeSoto. But he was a really good football player, obviously a really athletic family with a lot of good football players. Anytime DeSoto puts out a defensive guy, he's going to be pretty good, right? And he's going to have the attitude necessary to play major college football. Oklahoma State breeds them as well, right? If you go play secondary at Oklahoma State, you're a pretty good football player.
We'll keep an eye on him coming to Texas for a visit and then headed to Alabama, where his coach, Kalen DeBoer, is now. So we'll see Jabbar Muhammad, a name to watch. Texas also apparently interested in Alabama former 5-star tight end Amari Niblack. Another one of those players into the portal since Nick Saban's decision. top-rated tight end in 2022. Niblack obviously would fill an immediate need with the loss of JT Sanders. And speaking of tight ends, Texas is also interested in a kid named Ben Yorsich, who played 3 seasons at Stanford, caught passes for more than 1,300 yards. Keep an eye on those 2 players as well. And as we, the portal is so confusing, Mike, to a lot of us and even people that cover it, because I was told the portal closed in early January. It hadn't closed. Obviously, the players whose coaches have left can jump in it. But at some point, you have to enroll in school, right? School started this week for Texas. I mean, I know there's a 2-week period of ad drops where you can still get guys into class. So eventually this will slow down. And I still think Texas has a big need at defensive tackle, because one thing we haven't talked about here in our first quarter is the loss of your defensive line coach, Bo Davis, to LSU. Also, DeAndre Robinson, who was one of your defensive tackle commitments for the recruiting class. He didn't show up this weekend, and they've let him out of his NLI. He was recruited by Bo Davis, and so now he wants to reopen his commitment for early February. So I do think there's a need at tackle. As good as you were last year and the last couple of years at defensive tackle, you're going to have a bit of a hole there potentially. Alfred Collins is coming back. That's great. You've got Sadir Mitchell. You got Vernon Broughton. But this may be a team next year, Mike, that's better in coverage. They're faster and more athletic at linebacker and maybe on the edges, better in pass rush. But I don't know that they can be as good as they were at defensive tackle. I mean, that's one of the best defensive tackle duos they've ever had at Texas. So, but still, I still think they need some people. But at the same time, you do have a closing window this time, but there is always the spring portal when it opens after spring practice.
Yeah, I think it's important to probably get a coach in there and then let him go attack the portal, based on guys he likes, or maybe he has relationships, existing already with some dudes. And so, until that person's in place, it's probably hard to go pick out portal guys. I think you do wait until after spring and kind of see what's out there. I don't think the spring portal is going to be a bunch of star players, but it's going to be a lot of rotational guys. And if you're Texas, you're probably looking to add depth more than starters at the defensive tackle position at this point in the game, right? Unless, maybe Michigan opens up and then a couple Michigan defensive linemen get in there, something like that. And so I think if you're Texas, this is kind of how everybody else lives. You're not going to have Coburn and Moro Ajomo and then Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy all the time. Like, if you can have one really good defensive tackle and then some supplementary players, that's typically how it goes. I think Longhorn fans have just been spoiled the last couple of years, and this is kind of how everybody else lives, and it's going to be up to the surrounding cast, as you mentioned, to kind of fill that void and step up, play better, and maybe kind of hide a little bit of the drop off that's natural when you have 2 future top 2-round draft picks at defensive tackle.
Yeah, they're hard to replace, no question about that. And Alfred Collins coming back helps. I think Vernon Broughton can develop, and they're pretty high on Sadir Mitchell as well. But yes, I mean that's a lot of beef up front. All right. Also, in our first quarter, brought to you by the Texas Mortgage, got a lot of info today. The one thing I'll say about the defensive line coach is that the name I keep hearing from people is Roderick Wright, former great player at Texas. Nolan Tat would tell you why they haven't hired him yet. He's coaching as an assistant D-line coach at Houston with the Texans and D'Amico Ryans. He's a guy apparently they like his upside. Of course, a legacy at Texas, but they can't, much like Chris Jackson with the Jacksonville Jaguars last year, Mike, they can't hire him until his season is over. Might happen Saturday night or Saturday afternoon. We'll see, but that's what I'm hearing. And I agree with you. What's the matter? Not going to lose? Sorry.
I'm going to lose.
Well, until their season ends, you can't hire Rod Wright. So, to your point of the spring, but we remember, Rod Wright, he was a great player. I loved covering him. And he's embraced the coaching role and is in a good place down there in Houston, learning a lot from a guy like D'Amico Ryans.
Yeah, he was at UTSA, got a stop at UTSA, a really good defensive line coach, produced some NFL players there at UTSA, actually, Marcus Davenport and a few others he had a hand in. So, yeah, a really good football player like Bo Davis going back to LSU, coming home is always appealing, right? And, you do a good job at Texas, you're gonna be on the fast track up the totem pole in the coaching world. And so what is the pay? I don't even know this. Like, how much more? I bet it's a pay raise. Right. I mean, coaches get more money in college. So I'd imagine it, even though it is going from pro to college, a little bit maybe anti-intuitively, it's a raise and probably a promotion.
Yeah, I think it's a bump. He's an assistant D line coach down there in Houston, so helping out. But yeah, I think coming home would be big for him, and I think that's what they're waiting on. I can't report that, but that's the suggestion I've gotten and why they haven't moved quicker to replace Bo Davis. Last first quarter note, just be advised, and Mike, you can weigh in real quick. But the big this weekend, as this comes out late in the week, Thursday. Longhorns are hosting a big junior day coming up this weekend. It's the first of 2024, and a massive list of junior day invitees, including the kid from Duncanville, DK Moore, the wide receiver who's committed to LSU, Jonah Williams, 5-star linebacker, Michael Fasusi, a 5-star offensive tackle from the Metroplex, 5-star linebacker Riley Pettijohn, 2026 athlete London Smith, 2026 edge Kevin Ford Jr., high 4-star corner Jabari Antoine. So this is the beginning. And, we've talked about playing for a national championship, Mike, beating Alabama, all those things. That starts to really have impact in the class of 2025 and 26. And these guys are coming to campus this weekend. Some big names on that list for Texas as they get back to winter workouts.
Do not miss hanging outside the facility and then just like interviewing kids as they come out, like 1 and 2 by 2, for like 5 hours on junior day things. Shout out to the recruiting reporters. That is a grind there on a random Saturday. Hopefully the weather's pretty good. There's a basketball game, right? They're playing Baylor. So they
Yep.
like to have it kind of around there. Moody's fun, so the atmosphere should be pretty good. I think one of the important things here that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot is, you want to show them the facilities and you want them to talk to some players and you want them to get an idea of what campus is, but really you want them around each other. Because like if they're around each other at Texas, they start talking about playing with each other and who can go where, and like you can build a little bit of, kind of a group, mentality there where maybe 3 or 4 guys go, hey, we should go to Texas and we can be the next group there or whatever. And so not only getting them to campus is important, but getting them at the same time, having that sheer amount of talent in the building can kind of make everybody look around and go, hey, if everybody in here comes here, we can win a national championship. And that's why all of these colleges try to do these kind of big events with all these star players.
Yeah, cluster them together. All right, that's our first quarter. Closed on time by our man Carlos Carrion, TheTexasMortgageGuy.com, online at TheTexasMortgageGuy.com. As we told you every episode, 37 in. He's been was our first partner. When it's time for a new mortgage or refi, always better to work with an expert in the field who's also a diehard Longhorn fan and a lifelong Austinite like Carlos is. Just find him online at TheTexasMortgageGuy.com. Born and raised right here, diehard and avid Longhorn fan. Almost a decade in the industry, not just to provide you with a quote, but really had lunch with Carlos just the other day, had some questions for him on some other stuff. He is your guide, help solve problems, strategize one of the most important financial decisions of your life. Tremendous guy, great communicator, fast response times. If you are in the market or know someone who is, new home, selling a home, certainly a mortgage for a mortgage refi, talk to Carlos Carrion to get all the help you need. TheTexasMortgageGuy.com. That's TheTexasMortgageGuy.com. Also on social media, Facebook at Carlos Carrion there, and also on Twitter or X at Carlos Carrion 36. Second quarter delivered by the Good Times and Incredible Scratch Comfort Food at Hay City Store and Ice House. Absolute destination location in Driftwood, Texas. Travis and Tamara Tyndall have opened something special out there since 2015. They also have a great new restaurant in downtown Buda, Texas called Taste on Main. Check that out right there on Main Street. They are helping us with our second quarter here, been one of our founding partners as well. Hey, second quarter, Mike, the conversation about the Longhorn offseason roster comings and goings. Before we get into some Texas players headed to the NFL draft and what are the prognostications, how about the 4 players who decided to forego the NFL and return for another season? Obviously started with Quinn Ewers. He made that official with a video, but really sounded after the loss to Washington in New Orleans as a guy that is planning to attack the offseason, knows he's got to get better if he wants to be a high draft pick. Alfred Collins also coming back, Jahdae Barron, David Benda. Give me your thoughts on those 4. Those are veteran players coming back to really lead this Longhorn culture push into the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, Texas is losing a lot of guys. You're losing Jalen Ford. You're losing Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. You're losing Christian Jones. You're losing a Jordan Whittington. You're losing a lot of leaders from this football team to have guys that are, obviously super talented and are going to play a lot of snaps. But to have them kind of lead this next group of players along, and in February and in June and those times where no one is looking, well, Jahdae Barron's looking. right? Like Quinn Ewers is looking, like David Binda, like guys who have been there and know what it takes to get to a national semifinal have been there, and that carries weight, right? Like the coaches can't watch every single step. The coaches can't be at every single off script practice. They just like parents, we don't listen to them all the time, even if they can, right? And it means more when your older brother gets on you, or your uncle gets on you, or your friend gets on you. And so I think for Texas to have those guys in the locker room is awesome. To have them on the field is great. But to have them in film study and in workouts and just in class, like that kind of stuff is immeasurable and something that kind of helps keep the ball rolling at these programs that win year in, year out.
Yeah, I agree with you. And if you combine Jahdae Barron with Andrew Makuba, who, he's new to the program, but I mean, 3-year starter in Clemson. This guy's going to bring that same attitude. He's a 5-1-2 guy, kind of like Michael Taff. I've dubbed him the 5-1-2 crew, Mike. Michael Taff, Jahdae Barron, and Andrew Makuba. 3 guys who are going to kind of be the heart and soul of your secondary, all from Austin, Texas, all from the 5-1-2. I think they're all really good leaders too. And, they're, got Terrence Brooks, got Manny Muhammad, maybe Jabbar Muhammad. They're going to be talented. And Derek Williams, the safety. It'll be different personnel, but I think they're moving to more malleable defensive backs, more cross-trained that can play multiple positions, which is what they want to be. So I think you see so many Longhorns into the portal. And speaking of that portal, Mike, before we get to the NFL draft conversation, let me mention, because it's the Eyes on Texas multicast, I want to keep you up to date with everything happening. The Longhorns have 13 players of last year's roster jump into the portal. 11 of them have already found new homes. Malik Murphy, we know, is going to Duke, Mike. Charles Wright, the latest to commit, the quarterback out of Austin High. He got his degree here at Texas. Now he's going to go play football at Appalachian State. Good for him. Casey Kane going to UNLV. Isaiah Nayor to Nebraska after transferring in from Wyoming, but he's going to go play for Matt Rule. Sawyer Gorham Welch is going to Coastal Carolina. Trill Carter, the defensive lineman who came in from Minnesota, spent 1 year. He's going to Auburn, as is Jaron Thompson. This past week, Jaron Thompson played a lot of football at Texas, and he's going to Auburn. Good for him. Jalen Catalon to UNLV. You told us that last week, Mike. Larry Turner Gooden, B.J. Allen, and Xavion Bryce. Turner Gooden going to San Jose State. B.J. Allen going to North Texas. Xavion Bryce to North Texas. Only Keaton Crawford and Christopher Ross yet undecided about where they're going to go. So as you said, this is when you say roster overhaul, Mike, you're losing 10, 11 guys to the draft. You got 13 in the portal. You've only brought in 6, but you are adding, this high school class that is, 18, 19 deep that's already here. But this is just the natural ebb and flow of a college football roster. And add the portal, and it gets even more ebb and flow.
Yeah, and it also shows you that even though everybody thinks NIL plays the biggest factor in where these kids go, and I'm not here to suggest it doesn't play a big factor, a lot of the places you just mentioned these guys are transferring to are places with ties to coaches that they've known before. Coastal Carolina has some former Texas guys. North Texas had Chris Gilbert, the former high school relations leader at Texas, is the tight end coach at North Texas, right? So like that's where that connection comes from. UNLV, obviously, with Brennan Marion getting a couple players. And so those points of connectivity really matter in the transfer portal. It'll be interesting to see kind of how the NCAA kind of deals with some of that, like the Jedd Fisch thing. He's going to go from Arizona to Washington. He's probably going to take 10 to 15 players from Arizona with him. How legal, like where does that go? Like how do you kind of stop that from happening? So it is interesting to kind of watch the trends and where people go and why people go to different places nowadays in college football, because there's so many variables that used to not exist.
Yeah, we saw Lincoln Riley take a lot of Oklahoma guys when he went to USC a couple of years ago. This is not uncommon, and it's relatively new, but not certainly brand new for sure. But the Longhorns, I think, when we talk about this roster overhaul and change, it's healthy attrition for them. A lot of those guys weren't going to play football at Texas a lot, right? They weren't high on the depth chart. They're going a different direction in the secondary as far as type of player they're looking for. A lot of those guys we mentioned were Tom Herman recruits, and that's healthy, I think. I think guys that, Charles Wright's a great example. Malik Murphy, not going to play here, wants to play, got to choose a spot where he's comfortable, and is going to go get to play, quite honestly, because whatever we think of NIL and getting paid and all of it, if you're not playing, you're not making NIL, and you're not, experiencing college for what you want to be. You want to play football, and these guys love the game, so good for them. But the Longhorns are replacing them probably with better players at the high school level and, the portal level of experience production coming in. So that's healthy roster management for Texas, because you're kind of cutting guys out of the bottom of the depth chart, adding guys that can fill immediate needs through the portal, and then bringing in another really talented class of high school players. This is kind of the way you want to run things. Give Sark credit for that. They do seem to be in a good place. Also, in our second quarter, let me mention the 11 players that have declared for the NFL draft: Jonathan Brooks, A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, J.T. Sanders, Jalen Ford, Christian Jones, Ryan Watts, Keelan Robinson, and Jeb Bush have all said they're headed to the NFL draft. And how about this, Mike? This is interesting. One of my favorite draft insiders is Dane Brugler. He's the draft expert at theathletic.com. This week, he released a 2-round mock draft in which he has 6 Texas players drafted in the first 2 rounds. It's a 2-round mock draft, which is way too early, but at least at this point, his assessment is as many as 6 Longhorns could be drafted in the first 2 rounds, which is essentially the top 60 picks, 64 picks of the draft. He's got 2 in the first round. Byron Murphy, according to Dane Brugler, would be the first Longhorn off the board, number 16 overall. Tavondre Sweat, number 30 overall to Detroit. Then in the second round, A.D. Mitchell comes off the board. Xavier Worthy gets drafted in the second round, top 50 type player. Jonathan Brooks, this one's interesting according to Dane Brugler, Mike, drafted by the Cowboys in the middle of the first round, coming off the knee injury. Of course, Tony Pollard's a free agent. They need a running back. Jay Brooks out of Hallettsville. That'd be interesting. And then J.T. Sanders, Dane Brugler mocking to the Kansas City Chiefs in the second round. Gosh, could that be the heir apparent to one Travis Kelce? Your thoughts? And is that is it out of the question? The Longhorns could have 6 guys in the first 60 picks of this draft.
No, I mean, I think all of those guys are capable of being, top, 2-round draft picks. Landon in Kansas City as a pass catcher would be a dream, right? I mean, anybody that, we saw that with Rashee Rice from SMU and what he's been able to do. Even if Kelce's there, you're going to have plenty of snaps, right? As he gets a little bit older, and you can do a lot more 2 tight end stuff, and that's back in vogue in all these offenses. And so Brooks and the Cowboys would be that would be a great, I'm sure that'd be a dream come true. I'm sure he grew up, a Cowboys fan or Cowboys fan adjacent just from being Texas. And so, it just shows the development of the Longhorns. And we talked about relationship with coaches and how important that is to recruiting. Well, top 3, top 4 on that list is being developed into an NFL player. Like if we're talking about things that universally matter to recruits, how many guys you put into the NFL draft and where you put them into the NFL draft matters a lot. If Texas can put 6 on the board after year 3 of the Sark era, that shows that they're developing a lot of guys into big time players.
Well, I think, that's only the first 2 rounds. I do think Christian Jones will be drafted. Ryan Watts likely gets selected at some point on day 3. Those are guys. Jalen Ford, he won't be a top 2-round pick, but as a linebacker, probably 3rd round, top 90 kind of pick. I think he'll be drafted for just his, ball skills, clutch playmaking and just leadership. Plus he's a really good athlete. So yeah, this could be a record draft, Rob. Mike, with as many as 6 in the first 2 rounds, could have 9 or 10 overall potentially, which would be the most the program's ever had. And that's speaking a lot to the talent they had and then how they're developing that talent. Because, Jonathan Brooks this time last year was an afterthought. I mean, we were talking about, oh my gosh, how do you replace Bijan and Rojo, who both got drafted? Well, Jonathan Brooks, before the knee injury at TCU, was rated by Mel Kiper as the number 1 back in the country, number 1 back on his board. And that's why it's not crazy to think the Cowboys could take him in the middle of the first round. Because if you have a first-round grade on a guy and he's got an injury, but he's still on the board with your second pick and you need a running back, you could do worse than that as a guy that projects to be healthy by training camp of next year. So, and the Cowboys have always been they're okay with taking a guy they have a high grade on in the second round, even if he has an injury flag or even a character flag. Cowboys have always been willing to take those guys just because it's a good value, and they need it because Tony Pollard is probably not going to be back. Who would be their running back? You got to draft or sign through free agency. So we'll keep an eye on that for sure. But that's pretty good stuff. So 10 or 11 guys into the draft. That is where the Longhorns are headed. We'll keep an eye on J.T. Sanders. Would it be because they had Tony Gonzalez in Kansas City, now Travis Kelce. And Travis Kelce, his brother Jason's retiring. You're not sure how much time Travis Kelce has, probably 2-3 years left, maybe 2. But if you are JT Sanders and you were drafted by KC to come in and learn the position, kind of tricks of the trade from a guy like Kelce, and then be the heir apparent with Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback there for the long haul, that would be pretty exciting stuff. And A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy. People might ask about A.D. Mitchell and Worthy in the second round. Look, there's a reason that most people are going to start mocking the Longhorn tackles in the first round. The receiving position is the deepest position in this draft, and it's going to be pretty much the deepest position every year, Mike, because there's just so many wide receivers. and so many talented wide receivers. You
7
don't
on
have to
7.
use your first round. Yeah, exactly. You don't have to use your first round pick on those guys. You can get good players. You said Rashee Rice, second, third, fourth round. You're going to take meat and potatoes in the first round. You're going to take quarterbacks, tackles, offensive tackles, those positions that are hard to find. Those are valuable picks. You're going to take them in the first round just because a guy like X-Man or A.D. Mitchell goes in the second round. That's still a good draft slot. If you're in the top 50, that's still pretty darn good.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be, top 5 receiver in the league talent good to be a first round draft pick, or to get that kind of a grade, in my opinion, just because, like you said, there's just so many of those guys. And Xavier Worthy he's not a complete right. He's not 6'4", 220, right? Like he's gonna struggle with contested catches down the football field in the NFL. I mean, he's a really good receiver. That's going to be, I would say, an awesome number 2 or low end number 1 wide receiver in the league, probably at least early on in his career. But then A.D. Mitchell also not a blazing speed guy, right? Like not going to set a record in the 40-yard dash. So you understand why these guys aren't top 15, top 20 picks, but you know that you can go make a lot of money and have a great NFL career, being a first option for, the 10th best team in the league or the second option for one of the top 5 teams in the league. You can have a lot of production and play for a long time that way.
Yeah, in this draft, the number 1 receiver is Marvin Harrison. Obviously, he's big and fast and great hands, great route runner. That's a complete receiver total package. Some comparing Marvin Harrison to the best receiver to come into the draft since Calvin Johnson, Megatron, back in the early 2000s. He's that talented. Malik Neighbors from LSU, Keon Coleman from Florida State. Those guys are seen as the top end. But yes, I mean, X-Man, A.D. Mitchell in that next wave that could be end of the first round, into the second round, top 50 kind of players, which is not bad. But, T'Vondre Sweat, it's hard you can't coach 360 athletic. He'll go in the first round potentially. And I was interested to see Byron Murphy as the first Longhorn off the board. That's going to surprise a lot of Longhorn fans, but you've seen him since he's at DeSoto. That guy, I know you compared him to Aaron Donald a little bit with his size and his motor. He doesn't stop playing. He is just a matchup problem, the leverage game, the motor. That guy's going to, middle of the first round, doesn't surprise me at all to see him 16, according to Dane Brugler.
Yeah, I mean, just a very low floor player, right? I mean, you know exactly what, or a high floor player, right? I mean, you know you're going to get a lot of good years out of Byron Murphy. He's probably going to run a 4.7 in the 40-yard dash and really impress people with his athleticism. Last week, I said he's my pick to be the best player out of this group of Texas to go into the NFL this year. He can play in a 4.3 and a 3.4. It's hard to find defensive line. Like I will not be surprised. I would be more surprised if he's available after pick 20 than if he's picked before pick 20.
Good stuff right there with Mike Craven. That is our second quarter, delivered by the incredible Scratch Comfort Food and amazing times, always at Hays City Store and the Ice House in Driftwood, Texas. Hays City Store, ready to serve you and your family every day of the week. Open 7 days, music 6 nights a week. The total package. I saw a great segment on the show, Day Tripper by Chet Nagrang on KLRU. They did a nice feature on Kyle, Texas, and it was on Hays City Store. Really cool, showing the Tyndalls and just what they've created out there under the gorgeous canopy of oak trees in the Texas Hill Country. Live music, as we mentioned, that Texas comfort food is really great. Indoor, even in the cold temperatures, they take that ice house and they put down the barriers. They got the heaters on in there, so it's still very comfortable to get in there and watch sports. Got some great food. They have the indoor old school city store where you can sit in there and have the hamburgers, the chicken fried steak, truck stop enchiladas, the wood fired pizzas, full bar, great margaritas, 53 beers on tap, and so much more. Check out their complete mouth-watering menu at HaysCityStoreTX.com. That's HaysCityStoreTX.com. Keep an eye out for that Day Tripper when it's on KLRU recorded. You get to see if you haven't been out there yet. If you've been, you'll be back again and again to Hays City Store. If you haven't been, you get to see it. Also, don't forget about Taste on Main. That's the Tyndall's new restaurant concept on Main Street in downtown Buda. Charming downtown Buda that's into a 100-year-old historic building. It's a steakhouse, seafood, raw bar, a little higher end, but still a casual atmosphere. Got a great outdoor area as well as the weather turns. That is Taste on Main in downtown Buda and Hays City Store and Ice House. Halftime also delivered by Just the Right Pressure by our friends at One Source Gas, your one-stop shop in Central Texas for all gas products. One Source Gas is your Texas compressed gas leader. Nolan's got that Houston Texans hat on. Longhorns in the NFL, the playoffs, 8 teams left, Nolan, who is still balling out and playing into mid to late January.
Yeah, we had obviously with the lack of teams, there's lack of Longhorns in the playoffs. So we only had 4 players playing in this wild card weekend. We had Chris Boyd playing for the Houston Texans, recorded 3 tackles, 1 solo, and that solo was a punt coverage tackle that pinned him in between the 10. So, which didn't really help because then they just went down and scored 95 yards. And then down to Miami in that Kansas City and Miami Blizzard game. We had Deshaun Elliott was second on the team in tackles with 9, 3 of them being solo. Charles Omenihu in that same game on the other side of the ball only recorded 1 tackle. And then Justin Tucker was on a bye week this week, but he will be playing Houston in the divisional on Saturday at 3:30.
I got some breaking news. I got some breaking NFL news here. Adam Schefter reporting that Dallas is not making a head coaching change. Mike McCarthy returning for next year.
Wow.
Surprising. That earned a pink slip, what we saw on Sunday, but stay the course. I will say, and we talked about it a lot on our morning show in Austin about the Cowboys, when Mike McCarthy became the play caller and they built this offense, he's kind of married to Dak. I mean, it's hard to separate them now because the offense is so intertwined together. I know that's not great for Cowboys fans because we saw Dak underperform again in the big spot, and Mike McCarthy maybe not. And it's the big disappointment for Cowboys fans in that spot. And thanks for the breaking news, Mike, here as we record this on a Wednesday evening. There's so much coaching talent available. I mean, it's rare to be in a spot where Mike McCarthy's been a good coach, but Bill Belichick's available. Mike Vrabel is available. Pete Carroll is on the street. You could have a really good coach. And my concern, if I'm a Cowboy fan, is the report for Bill Belichick is he still wants to coach, but he's looking for a talented roster that's underachieving. Well, that sounds like the Cowboys. That also sounds like the Eagles in their own division, Mike, who just came off of a pretty dreadful finish to their year. They collapsed. Nick Sirianni could be in hot water there, even though he's in the Super Bowl 1 year ago. I mean, if you're Bill Belichick and you're trying to get to Don Shula's record, trying to prove that you can win with a good roster, Eagles and Cowboys as talented as any. Cowboys had 9 Pro Bowlers. They're all pros this year. And the quarterback's in place. So if you don't have to develop your quarterback in Philadelphia or Dallas, where do you think Bill Belichick lands if you had to guess?
I mean, Philadelphia would be a good one if that opened up. I guess the Chargers feel like the most logical destination. Just they feel like the closest to winning open right now in the NFL if Dallas and Philly don't open up. Here's the thing with Dallas, in my opinion. The quarterback's not going to be the reason that you win the Super Bowl, right? And so you're going to have to build an advantage on your offensive skill positions or on your offensive line, or your defense is going to have to be dominant, or you're going to have to outcoach some guys. Like you're not going to be even everywhere else and then go win the Super Bowl because Dak's not that guy. He's just not. And so to me, if your head coach isn't the reason you're going to win the Super Bowl and your quarterback's not the reason that you're going to win the Super Bowl, you're in it, right? Like you're in a tough spot there. And so you can't change the quarterback. Like I think people like me would suggest changing the quarterback, but the way contracts work and the way quarterbacks are, like you're not going to get better at that position and save any money anywhere. So it feels like the only thing you can do to give yourself a fighting chance is to go get an advantage at the head coaching position. And you have the greatest freaking head coach of all time sitting out there who wants to coach again, who wants to be in the league. Like, I didn't think Jerry would do it because you're not going to give the keys to a guy who's going to be the real boss inside the building. Mm-hmm. But if he was smart and really wanted to go win a Super Bowl before he rides off into the sunset, that's the kind of hire you got to go make. That, or like if Tomlin leaves the Steelers or something, but Jerry's not capable of doing that. So the Cowboys are going to be what the Cowboys are.
Yeah, don't disagree with you. No, I think you said it perfectly. And you're not going to win it because of Dak. But the other thing Dak can't do is throw those 2 interceptions he threw in the first half that lead to 14 points. I mean, you can't. The last 4 Cowboys playoff losses, Dak has been miserable in the first half, and the Cowboys have trailed at the intermission of each of those games. He's not going to win it for you, but he also can't lose it. And of late, he's been losing the game for you. That's a problem. And that's what Mike McCarthy was tasked with doing, at least for the regular season. It worked. Led the NFL in touchdown passes. He threw only 9 interceptions. But again, they didn't beat good teams when it mattered, even in the regular season. Those 12 wins kind of hollow based on who they were and the wins they had. They lost to Buffalo, lost to the Niners, lost to the Dolphins in games where you're playing a really good team. So, and even that Detroit win they had on Christmas or New Year's, that was controversial. I mean, Lions still think they won that game with a 2-point conversion. So Cowboys could have been 0 for 4 against the best teams they played outside of Philadelphia. So interesting breaking news and good stuff from Nolan on our halftime. It's brought to you by our friend Richard Strever and his awesome team at One Source Gas, your compressed gas leader here in Central Texas. I always tell you this in our halftime, but why are they growing like they are at One Source Gas? They're stealing market share from folks all through Austin, down into Hayes County, Williamson County, into San Antonio now, New Braunfels even. Well, it's because they do it better. They do it better. They're providing a better service to folks who need compressed gas daily and weekly. If you have a business, service and hospitality, bars and restaurants, you also service in the medical industry or the veterinary industry, industrial, and you need compressed gas on a daily basis or weekly, let One Source Gas, locally owned and operated for over a dozen years. They understand that exceptional customer service is the key to success when you're providing products that help run your business. So if you're a bar owner, dental office, veterinary clinic, and you need compressed gas and want it done better, call Richard and his team at One Source Gas. That's 512-214-8484. Or go to the website, onesourcegasatx.com. Spell out the word one, by the way, O-N-E, onesourcegasatx.com. Or call them 512-214-8484. Richard or one of his team members will be glad to help you with your compressed gas needs now and into the future. Third quarter time, presented by Brain Vault Technology. Brain Vault, much more than a mouthpiece. It's an orthotic, proven way for young athletes to play hard but play safe by minimizing the risk of concussions. Our third quarter, Texas basketball off to a 1-2 start in Big 12 play. They're actually playing tonight as we record this episode, a home game they have to win, Mike, against Central Florida. You mentioned the Baylor game coming up this week. I mean, the Longhorns are about to head into the gauntlet of their season. They're already 1-2 with a home loss to Texas Tech, a road loss at West Virginia. West Virginia was a 5-12 team, and they went in there and lost that game this past Saturday. Things are not trending in a good direction for Rodney Terry right now. Still trying to figure out the identity of this team, the roster. Getting Dylan Dessou back in. Max Asmus and Dessou have been great when they've been on the court, but they're really not getting much else from anybody else.
Yeah, it looks like Cunningham's going to the bench and Horton's going to be in the starting lineup today from what I've seen on Twitter since we've been recording. So a little bit of a lineup change there to see if they can spark something. I think Cunningham coming off the bench will be good for the second unit, like give just like kind of an energizer bunny there. And I'm sure he'll play the starter minutes coming down the stretch, right? He'll probably be on the floor in the final 2 minutes of crunch time. But yeah, they got to figure something out. Just haven't been great. Obviously, to start Big 12 play, not a lot of big wins, obviously, and non-conference play either. So, when is it time to start wondering if this team, is going to be a tournament team, right? Or if they're playing, if they're battling week in, week out just to get into the tournament, much less seeds, kind of where the panic button is for the Texas basketball team. Because it feels like this time last year, Texas is on the rise to the moon, right? Like Texas basketball, the Moody Center opens and how great that was received and how awesome an atmosphere that was. A couple 5 stars committed, right? Chris Beard back, former GA, everything kind of going in Texas basketball favor this time last year. And then flash forward to this year, and there's already kind of talk about kind of what is going on at the roster and what's going on in head coach. So it's just crazy in college athletics how fast it can change. And I do wonder what the talking points are going to be if this team ends up, 500 in Big 12 play and scrapping into the tournament.
Well, I would say this. It's going to be the talking point is going to be Rodney Terry. Same time, is that fair? Right? Chris Beard, he had year one where he rebuilt the roster and they made the tournament, didn't make a long run. Last year was the year where it was year 2 with all those guys together. And Rodney Terry, of course, did a great job after the situation with Chris Beard in December into January. It was one of those situations. It was impossible not to hire Rodney Terry. He took you almost to the Final Four. So it was one of those. He did a great job. He did more with any team that Texas has had in a long, long time, a couple of decades. But at the same time, it's hard to rebuild a roster completely when everybody. We knew Marcus Carr and Andrew Jones and all those guys were moving on. You did get Dylan Dessou back, but he's been hurt until recently. You bring in pretty much a whole new roster except for Bart Cunningham and Dylan Mitchell and Dylan Dessou, Tyrese Hunter. And so you're trying to meld all these guys. As I've said from the beginning, Mike, my biggest concern with them is their defense. They don't get stops when they need to. The West Virginia game was a good example. They were in foul trouble. They committed 41 fouls. And some people say Big 12 officials, but they're just not great on-ball defenders. When you're playing aggressive teams, you get in foul trouble. 27 free throws. West Virginia made. Texas also had 22 turnovers in that game, which you can't do. They still only lost by 3 points because Max Abmas scored 32 points and nearly carried you to a victory somehow. They did beat Cincinnati on the road, which was huge because Cincinnati's, they're 2-3-1 right now in the Big 12. That's what Texas beat them. They've got it in them, but can they bring the consistency? That's going to be the question. I would just say this: they got to win the home games. I mean, they got to beat Central Florida tonight. Have to. Baylor on Saturday. You got to win your home games, quite honestly, because the road in the Big 12 is such a gauntlet. Mike, how about this? Fran Fraschilla had a tweet this week, which is remarkable. It puts it in perspective just how tough this league is with the additions of the new schools and the holdovers. Top 16 toughest strength of schedules the rest of the way. 14 of the 16 are the Big 12 schools. 14 of the 16. It's all Big 12. The only two that are in it that aren't Big 12 schools, I think, are two Big 10 schools that have a tough schedule. But it's all Big 12. So every night is a tough game. Every night's a grind. And, is this team built for that? We'll find out. They've got veterans. They got to come together. They got to play better defense. Rodney's got to figure out the rotation. But no, I mean, this is a challenge. I mean, you're talking about, Houston. By the way, but mention Kelvin Sampson here in our third quarter. Houston typically, when they were playing in the American Athletic Conference, I mean, they'd go 33-1. Right? If they weren't playing anybody, they'd be a 1 or 2 seed. They've already got 2 Big 12 losses. They went on the road. They won their first game at home, but went and lost at Iowa State, went and lost at TCU. So welcome to the Big 12. It's not the American Athletic. It's a lot tougher. And, Houston's already taken two conference losses after going undefeated in the non-con and in their first game. So, it's just what it is. And they don't look like a perfect roster right now. But they do have Dylan DeSue, and when he's going, he's a bucket. Max Abmas is a bucket. If they can get more from the supporting cast and maybe shuffle in that lineup, I'll be intrigued to see the buttons that he and Frank Haith and that coaching staff push here. But the gauntlet comes because after Central Florida, you're playing Baylor, you're playing just this Kansas murderer's row of Big 12 schools in a row. And the loss to Texas Tech to start conference was big. And Texas Tech, by the way, still undefeated as we sit here today. They're 3-0 in Big 12 play. So Grant McCaslin coming in from North Texas, doing a nice job early out in Lubbock. So we'll follow it. We'll cover it here on the Eyes on Texas multicast as the Longhorns develop into February and obviously into March. Are they a tournament team? We'll all watch together and talk about it pretty much always in our third quarter here on Eyes on Texas. All right,
I'll be there. I'll be there Saturday. I'll be there Saturday to kind of see, because they're going to need some quad 1 wins, right? Like that.
Yeah, they don't have any right now.
Yeah, that's the thing is they're going to have to beat Baylor. They're going to have to beat a Houston. They're going to have to beat a Kansas, and they get Houston and Baylor at home. They need one, probably both of those games to really add that to the resume. Because like we talked about, they didn't do that in the non-conference where they can hang their hat on a couple of those wins. Anything that they get for the resume, it's going to be in the Big 12. I think it's a team built to do pretty well in the tournament. Like if they were a 500 team and then had a real run in the Big 12 tournament, I wouldn't be surprised because like it does feel like a DeSue could control that, or the guards get hot and make some shots. But just day in, day out, like you said earlier, where do the stops come from? Where do the points outside of the guards come from on a consistent basis? This is a guard-driven world in college basketball, and I just don't know if I trust their guards to win big games.
Yeah, and get stops. They can't turn the ball over 22 times, quite honestly. And they got to be they really need to be a 38 to 40% 3-point shooting team too. Yeah. And they got to make shots because they want to be inside out. They want to go into DeSue, kick it back out. And DeSue in the game in which they won at Cincinnati scored 33 points. He was unbelievable. He even made 4 3-pointers in that game. So DeSue's a bucket. He can take you inside. He can take you outside. He's trying to show the NBA he's got an all-around game. Max Abmas is a bucket. He's the leading scorer in the NCAA history right now, past Jimmer Fredette this year. So he can score, but he is a defensive liability, so they got to figure that out. But they can get points and buckets. They just got to get stops, stop turning the ball over, and find some identity to their offense and to their rotation. But, yeah, you'll be there. They play tonight against Central Florida, Baylor this weekend. We'll talk more about it in our upcoming episodes here on the Eyes on Texas. All right, third quarter brought to you by my buddy Dr. Greg Eckert and his Brain Vault technology, which is absolutely revolutionary. We've told you about it all year long here on the Eyes on Texas. Hopefully you're getting signed up. It's that time of year. Here into the winter, into the spring with Brain Vault, the ability to get your young athlete fitted for the orthotic that helps minimize the risk of concussions. We've told you how it works and why it works on all of our episodes. Revolutionary patented mouth guard, proven to reduce the risk of concussions as a shock absorber in your mouth. It's fitted for your young athlete's jawline or yours. It fits children and adults We told you it started in the NFL for 8 years with Drew Pittman, the NFL agent, who had 100 players plus wearing the Brain Vault technology and no recorded concussions. It optimally aligns the lower jaw in a position that strengthens the neck muscles, minimizes concussive forces at that point of contact, that collision point when the mouth clenches, the collision is happening. Clenching that jaw in the optimal position allows for maximal force production by the muscles of the neck to help take that energy. Strong neck muscles help slow the head during contact, help minimize the stretch and shear of brain tissue that leads to traumatic brain injury. All you have to do is get yourself fitted. Learn more. Go to the website, brainvault.com. That's brainvault.com. It's backed by science, research-based and proven, patented as well. Learn more. Go to the website. You'll see the little click through that says, what is Brain Vault? You can read about it for yourself and then schedule a fitting, whether it's an individual or a group, because you have to be fitted for the mouthpiece, each individual on your team in a collision sport of any kind. Check it out at brainvault.com. That's brainvault.com. They bring you the third quarter. That'll take us to the fourth quarter, Mike. Our final 4 questions of the college football roundtable. Let me mention this, and we'll get into some of the other big stories, but a lot of conversation about Dwayne Aquina possibly returning to Texas. Longhorn fans know that Dwayne Aquina was in Austin from 2001 through 2013 and really was the architect and the brain, really the master of DBU, Defensive Back University. Developed a couple of Thorpe Award winners, 3 or 4 finalists for the Thorpe Award, as many as 12 or 13 NFL players, including my partner on the radio, Rod Babers. Just a tremendous coach who's 67 years old now. And it looked like, Mike, he was going to take a job as an analyst because Johnny Nansen has come in to be the new linebackers coach and co-defensive coordinator for Texas, replacing the outgoing defensive linebackers coach who went off to Nevada, Jeff Choate. And Dwayne Aquino was going to take potentially an analyst role because he was an analyst at Arizona. But since we talked last, Mike, Arizona's coach Jed Fish has left to go to Washington. And they've hired the head coach from San Jose State at Arizona to replace him. And reports are now that Dwayne Aquina has an opportunity to get an on-field coaching position, actually on the staff of Arizona, and that appeals to him more than being an analyst, getting back on the field, being able to recruit, being able to coach young athletes on the field, which he wasn't doing at Arizona. So it's looking more and more to me like Dwayne Aquina will not be coming back to Austin.
Yeah, Desert Swarm situation there. I'm happy for him. I'm glad that he'll have a whistle. Those coaches want to coach. Like, they don't mind being analysts. I'm sure they enjoy it more than just hanging out at the house all day, but they want to coach. They want to have a whistle. They want to tell guys what to do. They want to have that relationship, and you can do that as an on-the-field coach. So I think it's cool for Coach Aquina if he has that ability to do that maybe one more time before he retires.
Well, and if the new coach who was coming in from San Jose State had not offered him this, he probably would be coming. I mean, that's what I was told. Yeah. Because he likes Austin, loves Austin. He's 67 now. But you're right. I mean, Rod Babers, my partner, told me this. I mean, he's not he'll watch film because again, when you're an analyst, you can't be on the field coaching on game day. You can't be on the field on the practice field, directing and technique and things of that nature. And that's Dwayne Aquina. I mean, that's his heart and soul.
Yeah.
Being an analyst for him is kind of hard.
He needs to yell at somebody. He doesn't
and then
yelling at somebody.
Well, and impacting young people is the way he would put it.
No, I love Coach Aquina. He can bark at you. He can bark. Some barking. Yeah.
Well, I know some people when Nolan was growing up, he was coaching like Pop Warner and stuff in this area, and he's got 5 kids, and he was no different out there coaching the Pop Warner kids. Man, he was hot. He was into it. But that's you can imagine a guy like that up in a booth watching film, tendencies. That's fine, but it's just not that, if I have an opportunity to do the other, I'm going to do it even at almost, 67 years old. So what looked like it could be a great marriage with Dwayne Aquina coming back, probably not going to happen because he's going to have a chance to get back into coaching, which is good for him. And he was already living out in Arizona, which is pretty cool. What else do you have in our final 4, Mike? I mentioned Alabama has 3 5-stars, recent 5-stars into the portal since Nick Saban stepped aside. We talked about Amari Niblack, their tight end, Caden Proctor, their left tackle, Caleb Downs, the phenomenal freshman safety. This is going to be a mess for Kalen DeBoer, but you got 3 a bunch of really impact Alabama players. We already talked about Isaiah Bond coming to Texas. Alabama is going to have a whole new look come 2024.
Yeah, but 15 new guys could enter the transfer portal from Alabama, and he'll still have more talent there than he's ever had at any other stop in his career. And
that's
he made
right.
the semifinal last year, right? So he's stepping up in terms of the talent he's going to walk into. They'll have the spring semester. Alabama is always going to be attractive. I don't worry about Kalen DeBoer and having enough talent to win. Like I just think you've won everywhere that you've been. It's Alabama. Nick Saban's still going to be there to shake hands and kiss babies. Like Alabama, talent acquisition isn't going to be the problem, even if it does take a little bit of a step back. To me, the issue is, and it's why I wouldn't have given Sark the extension, because I don't think he would have taken the job. You needed to go outside of the tree. And I think it was smart for Alabama to go outside the Nick Saban tree, because it's already hard enough to replace Nick Saban. It would be even harder, in my opinion, to do so as one of his proteges, right? You were always going to have the one-to-one comparisons. You're always going to have kind of the, like in the Water Boy, where you're looking across the sideline and that guy, like that's always going to be Nick Saban to you, right? He's always going to be your boss and kind of in charge in that room. Well, DeBoer can come in there and kiss the ring and be respectful to Nick Saban, but he's going to do it his way, and he doesn't have any ties to the man to kind of listen to what he's saying or be beholden to anything of the past. And then also the route to success is easier now, right? Like you don't have to walk in there and be the third best team and the second best team, the first best team in the country anymore. If you're just the second or third best team in the SEC, you're making the playoff. And so like, you don't have to go in there and win national championships or be undefeated in the regular season. You go 10-2 next year and you're probably in the playoffs. And so if you drop down to be the seventh best team in the country rather than the third best team in the country, you're still in the dance. You can still win a couple playoff games and be viewed as a successful season. So I'm interested in how in college football it changes the way we think of coaches like James Franklin at Penn State. We've seen him as an abject failure, right? He's not beating Ohio State. He's not beating Michigan. He's not doing enough. Well, if he did exactly what he did last year, he's in the playoff. Now, is that good enough now, right? Is that a successful year if Penn State goes to the playoff and maybe wins a game? Same with like Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. And so I think Kalen DeBoer stepping into Alabama at the right time, I think it's smart that they went outside the Saban tree for it. But it'll be interesting because that's tough, man. Like that's like one of the 48 laws of power, right? You're not supposed to follow a great leader. He's following the greatest coach of all time. You're not going to be as good as you were before. How does the fan base deal with that?
Yeah, the bar is so high, and the expectation level so high, and they have to. But you can't tell fans to temper their expectations. That's just what they are,
Right.
and it's almost cruel what Nick Saban has left him. And now you got a Caden Proctor, who's a 5-star tackle who started as a freshman. Caleb Downs. I mean, he's Isaiah Bond, the tight end, Black. These are the building block kind of players that could keep you there. And now you have to kind of re-recruit. Now he could bring a bunch of guys from Washington, but Washington has a bunch of guys that are moving on to the NFL as well. That was a very veteran team that he coached all the way to the national title game. What about the Jim Harbaugh decision in our Final Four, Mike? I mean, he's interviewed with the Chargers, the Falcons already. Is it a foregone conclusion for you that Jim Harbaugh will not be the coach at Michigan when Texas plays there September of next year?
Yeah, my money would be on a different coach, probably, their offensive coordinator, Coach Moore to replace them and keep that thing rolling. It just feels like, you win the national championship at your alma mater, the NCAA sniffing around, there's going to be some kind of penalties, just right off into the NFL sunset and do the thing that you haven't done, right? And that's win a Super Bowl. If you can be one of those coaches that has won a championship in college and a championship in the NFL, and all of a sudden you're on a different echelon of coach. And so I think it'll open up. It'll be interesting if it causes a ripple effect. If they go in-house and hire more, then obviously everything stays the same. If they go outside and hire a Brian Kelly, then all of a sudden, this shuffling happens again and LSU's open or another big job opens up. So this is why teams make moves earlier and earlier, right? Like what we're seeing happen with Alabama. It's not fun to be the last team eligible for the portal because, people can come pick your bones pretty clean there rather than in December, like with everybody else. But the coaching carousel stuff never stops, and college football is now a 12-month-a-year business. And this is just another example of that. It feels like Michigan won the championship 3 years ago, and it was like 10 days or something. And all of this has happened since then. It's just pretty wild.
It is crazy. And part of me wonders if Harbaugh, who I think he is going to go to the NFL, he's going to slow play this because there's no rush. Michigan, meanwhile, back in Ann Arbor, is like trying to get a contract in front of him, have him sign it. He's haggling that and trying to give reasons why he won't sign it. But I won't wonder if he's slow playing it so that Sharon Moore can become the coach. Like they don't, because at some point Michigan's got to have a coach, and the coach, who's going to leave at this point to take that job with winter workouts starting and everything happening. It's almost like he's trying to force Michigan's hand to have to hire his guy. And also, as we talked about with the timeline on the portal, maybe it protects the program from everybody in Michigan jumping in the portal too. That classes have started. The window's not there. You have to wait till the spring now. Maybe give Sherrone Moore a chance to keep some talent there. I wouldn't blame Jim Harbaugh if he's kind of taking that tack that I'll take a job here at the end of January, pick my spot closely of where I want to be in the NFL, because he's already interviewed with 2 teams, and I imagine the Washington Commanders want to talk to him as well, among others. So we'll see. Jim Harbaugh off to the NFL. One other note, what's going on down at Texas A&M, Mike? Because I know you also, as part of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football and the Republic Football Podcast Network, I'm always big on keeping your enemies close, or your friends close, but your enemies closer. What is happening at A&M with Mike Elko? They've brought in a ton of transfers. What's the vibe of Mike Elko 1 month in?
Yeah, I think the vibes are pretty good on the A&M side. I do deserve some credit for walking the tightrope of doing a Texas podcast and an A&M podcast without the fan bases completely hating me. Like I do, I feel like I do a pretty good job of sometimes being a hater, but for the most part, playing it down the middle on both sides of that. But on all seriousness, I think A&M, I think talent for talent, maybe the talent leaving is more than the talent coming in. Like Walter Nolan, Evan Stewart, like those guys aren't walking through the door. But I think Elko has done a good job. They've signed 23 players through the portal, 14 players signed national letter of intent. And so I do think that, about 40 of the roster is going to be overhauled, probably more than that once the spring semester goes. So I don't know how to set an expectation, but he is getting football players that match with the identity that he's trying to build, and that's be a defensive football team that plays hard-nosed football. They've gotten a few offensive linemen, but they've added 8 transfers in the secondary, right? So, you see where he wants to get better at. But I think the vibes are good. It's just nowadays, how do you even judge this stuff, right? Like it used to be a little bit easier to kind of set expectations, and you gave coaches 3 years, and here's what the roster looks like. But with the portal, it's hard to even envision what the roster is, what the 2 deep's going to be, where the starters are. It can all change in April or May again after spring. And so I don't know where the expectations are for A&M, but it's a very important year, obviously, with Texas coming in the SEC. Like they want to be competitive out the gates, and it's imperative that Elko is able to do that.
Well, and it's not at all for Aggie fans and yourself, but you're not, by the way. There's a chance Texas could be preseason number 1 next year. Preseason number 1 with Quinn Ewers returning and getting Isaiah Bond and the receivers overhauled and all the portal acquisitions. It's just 6 of them to this point, but it could be 7 or 8. But need positions with a veteran O-line and Quinn Ewers back with a healthy arsenal on the receiving core. But they think could be an improved secondary. They'll lose a little bit on the defensive interior, but pretty talented everywhere else. Could be preseason 1, which comes with its own expectations with that game at Michigan looming in week 2 and Colorado State to start the year.
I got a stat for you, and I think it's the problem for A&M is only in 1975 is the only year Texas and Texas A&M have won 10 games in the same season. Right? Wow. Like historically, Texas has won 10 games 23 times in the history of Texas football. A&M's only won 9 games or more in 5 of those years, right? Like it usually doesn't go well for the other. And it's the same on the other side. Texas only averages, I think, 6.79 wins a year when A&M has a 10-win year. Like when one team is really good, the other team is bad. And right now, that pendulum has swung to Texas, and they are coming into the same conference. Historically, it's been really hard for A&M to keep up during those times of Texas greatness. And if they're entering another of that with Sark and the machine that's rolling like we talked about, it's going to be hard for A&M to catch up. They're going to have to do something that so far they haven't really been able to do in the history of A&M football, and that's be good at the same time Texas is.
Texas looks like they will be pretty good. And that's why we'll roll on with the Eyes on Texas multicast. That'll wrap it up for episode 37. Great stuff, Nolan. Great stuff, Mike, as always. It's a wrap on another edition, as we'll have another episode right around early February when the Longhorns wrap up their recruiting class of 20 and 24. We'll see what any additions from the high school ranks, obviously. We'll cover that as we roll forward here. We are a product of the Republic of Football and Dave Campbell's Texas Football Podcast Network, powered by Grande Equipment. Mike, tell folks how they can become a part of the team there at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. High school coverage, better than anybody. College coverage is as robust as anybody you're going to find anywhere with yourself and the whole team. How do you become a partner there at Dave Campbell's?
Yeah, texasfootball.com/subscribe. I got a lot of portal stuff, working through some two deeps, put out a projected Texas two deep and A&M two deep, just to kind of give an idea of where the rosters kind of look like, what's happening behind the scenes. But yeah, ramping up for a pretty big spring, and then magazine right around the corner. So if you subscribe, you get the magazine, you get the digital content, you can get Texan Live, all that stuff with the streaming. So full go at texasfootball.com at all times. And also,
Mike,
before we get out of here, Major Applewhite just got named the head coach of South Alabama. So congratulations.
I saw that. Yeah. Well, and congrats to
Major.
Major. Love Major. And yeah, and that was trending because the Alabama, Kalen DeBoer, hired their defensive coordinator who he had worked with at Alabama, or excuse me, at Indiana. When Kalen DeBoer was at Indiana, he had been the defensive coordinator there when the Hoosiers were really good a few years ago. And he brought him in to be the DC at Alabama. And that left that open, and Major Applewhite ends up as the head coach at South Alabama. The Jaguars, good for Major in that Sun Belt Conference. Very, very cool. Sun Belt features Texas State, who is on the rise there with G.J. Kinney. Good stuff. Appreciate that breaking news, Mike. Mike, do you guys, you don't have to give me the name, but do you guys already know who's going to be on the cover of the magazine in 2024, or is that still not decided?
It is not decided yet. We tend to not get into that until February. I'd imagine we could all get together, have two guesses, and know what's going to happen there. It's a pretty big game coming back. I'd imagine it's something related to that.
A little maroon, maybe a little burnt orange, and yeah.
The mystery box
right,
isn't too big this year. It's a pretty easy one to figure out.
Yeah, Sonny Dykes on that cover last year with your great story about Sonny. Nolan, great stuff, bud. Great. Looking forward to the Texans game on Saturday, NFL playoffs, and more Eyes on Texas multicast coming. I know Nolan, always the optimist, always confident. I grew up in Houston. I'm his father, but I'm always the pessimist, always negative. I'm assuming they get beat.
That's the Oilers.
Embarrassing. Yeah, that's right. And then the Astros and the Rain and the Rockets, Houston Cougars, Phi Slamma Jamma. It's just kind of the pessimistic nature. Not only will they lose, it'll be embarrassing somehow.
CJ's
kind of what I'm used to.
CJ's different. It's not. This isn't all Texans.
That's right.
Yeah, well, maybe. I would hope. I'm 51 years old. I'm hoping that that's true. Nolan, you're just young yet. And you've had the Astros too, which is giving you this whole false sense of security that I can't relate to. All right, guys. Thanks again to our founding partners, Carlos Carrion, the Texas Mortgage Guy, thetexasmortgage.com, Hayes City Store in Driftwood, Texas, and Taste on Main in downtown Buda, One Source Gas of Central Texas, Dr. Greg Eckert and his Brain Vault technology. Also, my dentist, if you want to get a great new restored smile, Dr. Eckert is the best for that as well in 2024. Find him, Dr. Eckert, with a U, Ueckert, and Grande Equipment, the locally owned, independent, but worldwide equipment company that has been serving heavy equipment needs in Central Texas since 2004. Find them online at grandeequipment.com. They are our presenting partner, and we can't thank them enough for all of their support all year round here on the Eyes on Texas multicast. It is the multicast that keeps you on top of all things Texas football. Available to watch weekly on the Dave Campbell's Texas Football and the Horn and Austin YouTube pages. It'll be uploaded here in the next by Thursday. Also available for download on iTunes and Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. That's a wrap on episode 38. Have a great week.